Welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy, and we are here in, I think this is episode 13, 14, something like that, because we are getting ready to talk Ohio State, Michigan in the game this week. It's pretty clear what we're going to talk about. I didn't have to do a ton of thinking about the show prep. We've got plenty to talk about with this game. The revenge factor for Ohio State, both teams 11-0, tons on the line. It's going to be a fun one at high noon on Saturday. Again, I'm Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 247 Sports. I'm actually at my second different bar recording this podcast so far this year. I'm at Endeavor Brewery in Grandview. They've got some nice brews here, and I've been enjoying what's this one? This is their Hefeweizen that I've got right here, and I recommend checking it out. I've been here quite a bit the last couple of days because the World Cup's taking place, but we won't get to that. We're here to talk football. We're here to talk Buckeyes. And to do that, we're going to start off by bringing in 97.1 and the Buckeye Show, Tim Hall. Tim, it's Thanksgiving week, so we had to change around our schedule a little bit. It's not happy hour time. We're recording this at 12:30 on a Wednesday, but welcome to the happy hour.
Why do you always say it's not happy hour time? I mean,
I just don't want people to feel bad.
Come on, it's always happy hour, especially on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I think a lot of people are already getting some PTO and getting ready to settle in. You know, people that aren't in our line of work but love following football and love the Buckeyes. This is pure heaven for them, right? I mean, Wednesday off work, Thursday, Friday, game on Saturday, NFL slate on Sunday. Hopefully you can enjoy that more if the Buckeyes win on Saturday. Then it's just going to be, NFL hate watching for Buckeye fans, but I feel 1 point victory good about the game coming up on Saturday, Pat. I'm incredibly nervous, but I also feel like things would be very bad for Ryan Day if he lost this game, and so I'm gonna push my chips to Ohio State's side by basically 1 point, which is all it's going to take for you to get to Indianapolis. Just hold on to protect home field, hold serve, get the job done by any means necessary, and move on to Indy and continue on with a shot, hopefully, to win a national championship, which I'm still not convinced of, but I don't think Michigan is some lock to win a national championship either. I think these teams are kind of equal in different ways. They play the game differently, Pat, but I think they're pretty darn equal going into this one.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you've got 2 versus 3. The first time that's been the case since 2016. You've got undefeated teams. First time that's been the case since 2006. But before we really dive into this one, I want to ask you, because like myself, you didn't grow up with this game. I mean, I moved to Columbus when I was 10 years old. My dad lived in Ohio before then, so I was well aware of what this game was, but I didn't really get to experience it my entire life. You moved to Columbus as an adult for work. What is your first memory of Ohio State, Michigan that stands out in your mind?
Well, I certainly remember watching this game as a kid. I can't really point to any specific team, but really you remember Michigan having some dominance in this series in the 1990s. And that was my heyday from when some of my earliest football memories click in, Pat, being born in 1984. So I'm a 10-year-old kid in 1994. And unfortunately, a lot of those John Cooper teams, which you remember them, like I remember, those wide receiver weapons that Ohio State had back in the day. And obviously Eddie George as a running back, one of the best ever play here, but also guys like Terry Glenn and David Boston and what those guys were. So it's tough, right? Because some of those Buckeye teams, the rosters they had in the 1990s, whether that was, Joe Germain or Bobby Hoying's teams, so good, right? But the seasons that were wrecked by Michigan, it's something that stings an awful lot. But then when the turn of the century came about, we moved into this golden era of Ohio State football, and they started to make the climb back in, to being, on Ohio State's side, to being competitive in this series and catching up from the early history when Michigan, in the early 1900s just shot out and had a huge lead, and you still got 8 games to go, right? I can't fingers right yet. 8 games to go.
Yeah.
So that's that. And for people that are scorekeeping, and I think you do in this rivalry, this is another opportunity on Saturday to pull within 7 of the all-time race to catch the rival here.
Yeah, 7, which is as close as it's been in quite some time. If they win, they were obviously 7 games away before last year, and you lose to the Wolverines. If you're watching this live, feel free to throw in your comments your first memories of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. For me, it was similar to you, Tim, because as a fan growing up of sports, again, my dad lived in Ohio for a while before I moved here, so I was very much aware this game was always something that we had on TV. But like really the first game I remember sitting down and like watching from start to end, dialed in 100%, was that 2002 game. Just because everything that was on the line there, Ohio State obviously waiting to go to the national championship game. I know I watched games before then. I have memories from some of the other games, but that's the one where like I can remember pretty much sitting and watching the whole game. Even, I was in middle school at that point. But that was like full on. We had some, I think I went to a buddy's house, actually. Everyone was dialed in. It was full focus on the Buckeyes and Michigan in that game. So that's my first like very distinctive memory of that rivalry. Obviously that whole season was edge of your seat. Every game mattered, but that one especially.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to have a positive early memory of it, when mine were negative, thinking about the 1995 and 1996 seasons, right? So that's and then I've also worked with some guys too who played in that era. D Miller, close friend who I've gotten to work with here at the station on again and off again through the years and in doing the pregame show for Buckeye football when I used to do that. It's the one time that they got to beat their rival, you had the loss to Michigan State, that the 1998 team. It's like, oh my God, what are we doing here? What's happening? But then again, you fast forward a little bit, and other friends I've made and guys that I've worked with. I mean, who can forget, the imagery of Beanie Wells running the football in that 2006 game, right?
Yeah.
And some busting off some big plays and the 1 versus 2, and like we said, the 11-0s, right? Because this is it. It was that and this. And when you're talking about 11-0s, I know undefeateds, but for two teams to actually be 11-0 going into this matchup, that was the only other time in 2006. And to work with a guy, and I just saw Beanie in the building yesterday. They were taping one of the special shows for 10 TV that'll air coming up here on game day, I believe. So it's cool to have, worked with some guys and know some people who had a big impact in this series. And we know what it means in this town, right? If you go out there on Saturday, all these guys that, maybe are looking for their first taste of victory, right? Because you didn't play the game in 2020. And think about that. This is in a long, long, long time here now with Ohio State's dominance over Michigan. You think about going all the way back to 2019 was the last time that they won this game. So you got a lot of guys on this roster, Pat, that don't know what it's about.
Yeah.
Don't know what it is to get a pair of those gold pants to beat this team. And maybe most recently, I think of a guy like Chris Olave, who came out with a bang and really showed who he was going to ultimately be when he was a young man, blocking that punt and catching a couple of touchdowns. Really, you look at what he did in the box score, it wasn't a whole lot else besides those 3 major plays that he made.
Yeah.
And it's who can come up and make a performance like that that's going to last for a lifetime. That's what you look for in this game.
You mentioned Michigan, Ohio State being 11-0. Crazy statistic in my mind here. So Ohio State has regularly won 11 games, other than the COVID season of 2020 where they didn't play that many games. They've done it every year since 2011. Michigan hasn't had consecutive 11-win seasons since 1903.
Unbelievable.
mind blowing. And I know they haven't always played that many games, so that skews it a little bit. But
right. But lately, I mean, when with college football switching to conference championships,
right,
you get the 13th game and then possibly a 14th game if you get to the playoff. That really is insane. So
yeah,
it goes to show you how really ahead of the curve Ohio State has been over the rival. The numbers obviously back that up with the Buckeyes dominating in this game through the past 20 years, but that's kind of crazy to think because Jim Harbaugh, he definitely brought an immediate turn in the win-loss record for Michigan. Getting rid, the end of Rich Rod and then Brady Hoke being a total disaster. He was getting you up to that 10-win plateau pretty consistently. Of course, had trouble in the rivalry games in his first, 4 or 5 years there with Michigan State and Ohio State. But then to finally get them to 11 wins, to finally win the Big Ten championship, still, you still have to say they're behind the Buckeyes. I mean, obviously, nobody would even doubt that. They're still behind the Buckeyes because he has not been able to take them to that next level, which, of course, Ohio State has already done as recently as 2014. So, and then there's another thing about not getting embarrassed. Michigan got embarrassed when they went to the college football playoff.
Well, and just consistency.
Ohio State usually,
right?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Well, just the consistency. You need to have, they did it last year. They won the Big Ten. They beat Ohio State. They made the playoff. But that's one season. If you're going to be where everyone thinks Michigan should be level-wise, it's got to be year in and year out. And obviously, they've put together a great season this year, no doubt about it. But if you don't cap it off, both teams, if you don't cap this off with a win on Saturday and then a Big Ten championship and then at least a semifinal appearance, I think both teams will feel pretty disappointed if they're not there.
Agreed.
Let's focus in on the game specifically. For the sake of this conversation, let's just assume Blake Corum plays. I don't know if he will. They don't know if he will. But how big of a concern in your mind is that guy? Because he's turned into a Heisman Trophy candidate running back this year. Ohio State's run defense has been good. It's not phenomenal, but they also haven't faced a running back like this kid. And, obviously with J.J. McCarthy back there, Michigan's not going to throw it around the park like Ohio State might be able to do. So how concerning is it to you, assuming he plays, and then what does it change in your mind if he doesn't play for Michigan?
He's a concern, I mean, it'd be foolish to say that he's not. If you've watched him play at all, he's a tough son of a gun. Being injured is being injured, right? But I think everybody on both sides of this matchup, if there's like a shred of a doubt that you could play, you're going to bandage whatever you're going to bandage. You're going to take whatever kind of legal shot you're allowed to take before the game. You're going on in there, right? Like I'm good to go, coach. So he's a concern. He's a great player. And that's what this rivalry is about. It's about big time players stepping up and doing whatever they can. I also believe in the guys that Ohio State has on defense, that they can rise to that challenge too. It is. I believe in it. And I know you do too, Pat, where when these teams are to a certain level, you can forget about what throws J.J. McCarthy missed against Illinois. You can throw out what the schedule was for each team and comparing wins and who looked worse against maybe a worse opponent. All that, all those semantics, just whatever. You made it to this Saturday, 11-0, and the blood is going to be boiling. So that's what it's about. I do think, with the way they want to run the football and the way they want to ball control, whether that's going to be Blake Edwards or Blake Corum or Edwards or somebody else for them, Tommy Eichenberg, our middle linebacker, broken hands and all, this could be a big-time legacy game for him. And I do think if the defense is going to play really well, and if they're going to do their part and they win this football game, he's going to end up with something between 14 to 17 tackles. And he is going to be in that A gap and in that B gap, running 3 yards downhill and cracking a running back in the mouth almost on a 2 to 3 plays in a row, when they're on their defensive sets. So I look forward to what he can bring. I think 35 is going to have a big game for Ohio State. And I'm wearing my Silver Bullets sweatshirt for you, just in honor of the performance that I hope they have on Saturday. And I think this is the game that that actually tells whether this is going to solidify these guys as a silver bullet defense. It's one thing for Jim Knowles to turn some numbers around, but I mean, you fix the defense to get to this game, and then you really fix it. It all goes for naught if you've done all this work and then you get to the rivalry game at 11-0 and you're home and it all falls apart. So this is what it's about on Saturday.
I just saw this on Twitter as you were talking about this. Michigan runs into a stacked box on 61% of attempts this year. They average 5.9 yards per attempt running into the stacked box.
Yeah.
OSU allows 3.5 yards per attempt at the stacked box and contacts ball carriers in the backfield at a 52% rate with the stacked box. So that's strength on strength right there.
Yeah, and that's football.
I mean, yeah, right. And especially Big Ten in the end of November football, we're going to see it on that side of the ball. Flip it, though. Ohio State, and we had this comment here from Anthony Lightfoot. We have to win, we have to throw, pass to set up the run, and don't get stubborn on the run. Tim, we've talked about this running game the last several weeks, and I made it clear a few weeks ago. I think Ohio State is clearly a pass-first team. That's how they have their most success. But we've seen the last few weeks, if you can complement it with the running game, last week when Dallin Hayden came in, they were able to run the ball. Things went a lot smoother. So maybe I was a bit too hasty to just say that the passing attack was able to handle it. We saw last year they didn't have the run game. In your mind, how much do they need to be able to run? I don't know who the running back's going to be. We could talk about that separately, but how important is it for Ohio State to have some semblance of a solid run game and not just have it all in C.J. Stroud and these receivers?
I mean, it's got to be important, Pat, because the way that Michigan wants to play, that's their MO. I mean, clearly, Anthony, like, I hear you, man. I get what you're saying. And I have some small doubts. I guess call me crazy about where CJ is overall, because I thought in that early quarter of the season, even in the Notre Dame game, we talked about it, the numbers might not have been there, but he had some great drives late in that football game to secure the win. And then he went into that next 4 or 5 weeks, I thought, in an all-time level zone. I mean, it was off the field, it was on the field, laser focus, just his ball placement and what he was doing consistently was just at an all-time level. And look, he's still an elite thrower. We can find the good film in every single game. That's not hard to do. Like, we can find the good film for CJ in every football game they've played where he's throwing an absolute dot to Marvin or Emeka. But then we can find some plays where he's maybe not using his head quite as much as we'd like him, not throwing the ball away on 1st and 10 like he should if the look isn't there, having some trouble with the mesh point with a handoff, you know what I'm talking about? So he's going to have to throw it. He's going to have to step up and make some big time plays because the Ohio State offense, like Anthony is saying, they're built for that, for Marvin and Emeka downfield getting big plays. To your question originally, I don't know how anyone can think that you can not run the football and have any semblance of a running game. I don't think you are held under 100 yards rushing and win this football game. Can you? You got to have something back there. You got to have something to chew some clock and show some physicality. You have to wear down that Michigan defensive line. It's a toughness game. Everything we talked about coming off of last year's game. I loved how Tommy Eichenberg had some profanity when responding in player interviews this week. I don't know if you saw that. I don't give a bleep. I don't give a bleep about what somebody up in Michigan said. We know what we've got in this room here. It's going to be about that. So I do think they have to run the football and run it pretty effectively to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a key for both teams. I mean, I think these type of games, it's line of scrimmage, right? That's how you win these games. Ohio State didn't have that last year. The Buckeyes have had it in most of these games of late against Michigan. Tim, I know you got some stuff on the fan to do, so you kind of said it earlier, but you're given a 1-point win. Is that right?
Yeah, man, that's what I'm ready to do. So,
all right,
let's go with
what do the Buckeyes have to do right to get that?
Well, I'm gonna go with a 24-23. I haven't thought about the score yet, but that's what I'll go. That's what I'll go with. I'll push it back to defense, man. I mean, this is I mean, they're going to have to throw the ball effectively the same way they're going to have to run the ball effectively. It's going to have to be balanced in that regard offensively for Ohio State. But this is a type of game where defense rises up to the challenge. They get off the field on third downs more often than not. You're going to have to do that. You're going to have to see this secondary step up when J.J. McCarthy is forced to throw. Those guys have to play better than they've played in the last 6 weeks. But I'm going to hope that everything that we've got up front, from the defensive line to those linebackers that with Seal and Tommy Eichenberg that we've talked so much about all year, those guys are going to have enough of a performance to help push the Buckeyes through. Special teams, don't overlook special teams. Lathan Ransom blocking a couple of punts in consecutive weeks. That's a big-time thing. We talked about Chris Olave. Somebody can go out and make a play like that. That could be the difference in winning or losing this football game.
Yeah, special teams for sure. We've seen it. As you mentioned, Chris Olave, there's been returns in this game, going back both sides of the ball. I think that's always an underlooked thing in these games. Even in just like Xavier Johnson last week when he had, I think it was the kick return. It was, didn't score, didn't do anything, but that's a guy who maybe one special teams play by Xavier Johnson just cements him as that walk-on guy who made huge plays for Ohio State in the biggest moments, and he's already done it this year. All right, Tim, well, I thank you very much for coming on. I know this is even a busier week than normal. Got Thanksgiving tomorrow, but I appreciate you taking 20-some minutes to talk some Buckeyes with us on the Happy Hour.
Everybody else, I mean, get ready to watch some Buckeye basketball taking on Texas Tech here in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Big chance for those guys to come away 2-1 at the Maui. This Texas Tech basketball team, man, they're good. They might be a little better than San Diego State, but I got a feeling Ohio State's going to pull out a slim win today.
Yeah, I told you yesterday that I was fully not in basketball season yet, but last night's win was fun. It's good to watch the Buckeyes kind of put a hurting on a good team.
Beating Cincinnati by almost 30. That's good. That's good anywhere, anytime.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Tim. I'll talk to you soon. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. See everybody. Go Bucks. Let's get it done on Saturday.
All right. Thanks for Timmy Hall there. Again, this is the Bucknuts Happy Hour. You know that if you're here. I've asked people already, but if you're tuning in live now, what was your first real memory of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry? Throw that in the chat. I'm interested to see what the different memories are from people. So put that in there. Also, if you want to throw in some predictions, what you think is going to happen on Saturday at high noon at Ohio Stadium, throw those in the chat as well. We will soon be joined by Alejandro Zuniga of our Michigan website at 247 Sports. He's going to come in and talk to us about the Buckeyes and the Wolverines. Give us a little bit more on the Michigan side of things. I did his podcast, which is already up and out. I did that yesterday, so you can listen to that if you want as well. They do great stuff over there. There's plenty of content on the Michigan side of stuff over at the Inside. Yeah, the Michigan 247 site. You can find it over there. So if you want to check them out, feel free. Again, I hear people asking, I am at Endeavor Brewery in Grandview today, my second different bar I've recorded the Happy Hour from. And there is a World Cup game going on, which is why I was here earlier. Was going to go home, but I decided, look, we're in a bar. There's a nice little spot over here where I can record the podcast. Why not record the Happy Hour from a place where you can actually have Happy Hour? And in fact, they are doing Happy Hour for the World Cup game. So I saw a couple people asking about the noise in the background. I believe Spain just scored a goal. So that was what that was. Anyway, we're here to talk Ohio State, Michigan. Tim was talking about his keys to Ohio State winning the game. Look, I love what CJ Stroud and these receivers have done, but I do think that it's going to be about which team can establish the run. And if Michigan has Blake Corum, obviously they have an advantage in that factor because they have one of the best running backs in the country. But if Ohio State can get any healthier at running back, I think it's going to be huge, whether that be Mayan Williams coming back, whether that's Travion Henderson, maybe a little bit healthier than he was last week. But if that's not the case, if those guys aren't ready to go, I think Ryan Day needs to be ready to hand the ball to Dallin Hayden and let him do what he did. Now, freshmen have made plays in this game. There's no doubt about that throughout the history of the rivalry. But you're giving a freshman running back the ball. And Ryan Day made the comment, I think it was this past or last week, that when you hand the ball to a running back, you're putting the whole team in his hands. You are, but thus far, all we've seen from Dallin Hayden, I don't know what's happened in practice, but what we've seen from Dallin Hayden is he's held onto the ball, he hasn't fumbled, he's made good decisions, and he's running the ball well. So to me, that is your best bet, assuming that nothing has changed significantly from last week, to get Dallin Hayden at the very least significantly involved. Whether he starts, whether he has the most carries, whatever the case may be, I can't imagine that a banged-up Travion Henderson, from what we saw last week, or Mayan Williams, who couldn't even play last week, is ready to take on a full workload. And I think that's going to be really important. Now, again, in the coaching staff, we trust, right? They see these guys in practice every week, every day. So, if they are really concerned about Dallin Hayden putting the ball on the ground, that is a major concern in a game like this with anybody. So you have to have that trust. I think that's going to be hugely important. And Timmy mentioned it before. It's going to be stopping the run the other way. How are they able to do that? Whether Blake Corum or not is going to be on the field, you've got to stop Michigan running the football. That is what they do. If you can make this team one-dimensional, if you can, put the ball into J.J. McCarthy's hands and say, hey, mobile quarterback, yes, but a guy who doesn't throw the ball overly confidently right now, a guy who's been prone for inaccurate throws and some mistakes. If you can force him to have to beat you, I think the Buckeyes would feel pretty confident about that. It would be his first time really playing in the game. He did get in some last year, but obviously he was not the starter. He was not the guy. So another factor I think is, and this is probably as obvious as it gets, but playing at Ohio Stadium. Michigan really got the home crowd going last year. It was rocking in the big house when they got up, and were able to maintain that throughout the game. So I think it will be very important, similarly for Ohio State, to get things going early, get that crowd, that noon crowd. I know people start the tailgates earlier on Michigan Saturday, but still a noon crowd. Get that crowd hyped, get that crowd going, and really try and make a difference there. Getting ahead, getting a lead is going to be important for this one. But let's get a little view of the other side of things. We're going to bring in my guy, Alejandro Zuniga, from our Michigan website with 247 Sports. Alejandro, it feels like I just talked to you yesterday.
Hey, how's it going? It's been a while.
Yeah, right. As I mentioned, I already pubbed it a little bit, but I did your podcast. That's already out there for anyone who wants to give a listen. Just for the record, for Ohio State fans here, I did pick the Buckeyes to win at the end of that podcast, so you don't have to be mad at me. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this live, if you have any questions for Alejandro about the Michigan side of things, feel free to throw them in the chat. But thanks for joining me, Alejandro. How are things going on your side of things?
Oh, I mean, things are going fine. I'm joining after watching Costa Rica absolutely get embarrassed in the World Cup. I'm Costa Rican, and
I'm sorry.
This is didn't expect big things from them in this tournament, but I certainly did not expect that.
Yeah, that was. I said at the beginning of this, I'm actually at a local bar by my house.
Okay.
And it was like either run home at halftime, or I found a nice little table here that I could do it at, and they've got the game on. So at one point, people were yelling things, and people in the chat were a little confused. But I'm sorry for that. Well, let's dive into this game so you don't have to think about that game as much.
For sure.
If you were to pick out one or two keys for the Michigan side of things to win this game at Ohio Stadium, what are those one or two most important things that Michigan has to do?
I mean, I think it all starts with health, right? There's really no question about that. And it's Michigan, as many big programs are, is very secretive about how things are injury wise. So they're never going to tell us. They're not going to give us a pregame injury report. They're not going to let us watch practice. Nothing along those lines. But this is a team that relies heavily on Blake Corum, right? And we saw that against Illinois last week when Corum was out, Donovan Edwards was out, starting tight end Luke Schoonmaker was out. Trevor Keegan on the offensive line was out. Those injuries really start to pile up. So I think for Michigan to have a good shot in this game, you need to be able to field Donovan Edwards. You need to be able to field Blake Corum. Hopefully he's healthy, and control the line of scrimmage like you did last year. There hasn't been a point this year where Michigan's been able to win a game through the air, right? That just hasn't happened this year, and I don't expect it to show up out of the blue in Week 12 or Week 13 against Ohio State. So you need to have a healthy and functional running game. It's got to start with that.
What is your confidence based on what you've heard, what you've gathered this week? That I love that.
It's just a Diet Coke. I drank my tears away already from Costa Rica.
Well, it sounded like you were ready to party. What is your confidence about Blake Corum? What can you tell us about the injury and kind of the situation there?
Yeah, I mean, with Blake Corum, it's a knock to his knee, right? The good news from what Michigan said post game last week is that it's not a structural issue, and I fully expect with both him and Donovan Edwards, I fully expect them both to travel. I fully expect them both to dress and warm up and see what they can do. Donovan Edwards, his injury, it doesn't seem to be lower body. It seems to be more of an upper body, potentially like a hand type thing. So you can maybe work around that if you're a running back. But there's ball security implications to that, and there's also like the fact that Blake Corum that Donovan Edwards is a pass catching option. That's why he's so dangerous. In terms of Blake Corum, we saw him a couple days ago. He does things in the community, and he was out delivering turkeys for the second year in a row. That's what he does.
Pretty cool that he does that, by the way.
Yeah, it's very cool that he does that, and cool that he does that. Last year he was the backup running back, and he wasn't as big of a name as he is this year. And the fact that he's doing it, despite being a Heisman front runner, despite suffering an injury, despite being the highest profile player on the team. Very cool that he does that. He's a very upstanding young man from everything that I can tell, everything that we've heard. But it's not a structural issue with his knee, so that's a good start. After he did get injured, he came in, he played 2 snaps, I think it was. He carried the ball once, and he stayed in pass protecting another snap. But we also saw him warm up before that second half against Illinois. And while his straight line ability was fine, we saw him cut a few times, and he clearly wasn't 100% comfortable. So like I said, I think he's going to give it a go. If it were a super serious injury, if it were something structural, obviously he wouldn't have come back in for the second half of that Illinois game. Right. But do I think he's going to be 100%? I doubt it. But I'm sure he'll be injected with, whatever painkillers, whatever they have. Maybe the magic spray that they have at soccer games. So
right.
Can't feel a thing.
Yeah, I mean, as a number of Ohio State players pointed out to it this week, no one is 100% healthy at this point in the season, unless you just haven't played this year. Everyone's banged up. Yeah,
I mean, I think the difficult thing, and it's certainly the case with JSN, with Jackson Smith and Jigba. There's stars on both sides of this team, both sides of this rivalry that are going to be out. I think the difficult thing for Michigan fans, and maybe for Michigan to fathom, is like, this is your number one guy, Blake Corum, and it happened 30 minutes before the biggest game of the season.
Right.
It's you were so close to getting him healthy to the game, or at least, as close to 100% as you could possibly hope for. And that's sort of the nightmare scenario, is that all of a sudden you go from a Heisman candidate and his very competent backup to, within the last couple of games, both of them have taken off. That means that you're maybe relying a lot on a CJ Stokes, who's talented, but he's a true freshman. And when Michigan needed a 4th down last game, they were throwing the ball to a walk-on, Isaiah Gash. And that's not what you want from either side of the rivalry in the game, right? You want both teams to be as 100% as possible.
Yeah. Regardless of whether Corum plays, I'm curious about JJ McCarthy. And Rick Montoya asked, will McCarthy crack under the pressure on such a big stage? I won't ask it that way, but just your confidence level in McCarthy to make, if Corum's in there, obviously he's going to have to make, or if Corum's not in there, he's obviously going to have to make more plays. But regardless, I imagine there will come a point in this game where he has to make the throw, make a run, do something on a third, whatever the situation may be. How confident are you in what you've seen from him this season as a first-year starter, that in a game like this, he can get the job done in those type of situations?
For sure. I mean, I think it's a fair question, Rick. I don't think crack under the pressure is the term I would use with JJ. I think everything I've seen from him, both on and off the field, he's a very confident person. He's a very confident player. His teammates really respect him. He's a very good leader, both on and off the field. So I don't think confidence is really the issue. I don't think that the stage is going to be too big for him. Michigan, he's a first-year starter, but he's a guy who has been in big situations before. Michigan played him for much of the second half of the college football playoff game last year. They had a package for him against Ohio State last year. He did goal line stuff against Michigan State. So he has that experience. I think where my concern is with him is, he started the year as the most accurate quarterback in college football, and that has taken a significant decline over the last couple of weeks. So that's my concern. Is less it's pressure and more it's just that, his level of play hasn't progressed at the level that maybe Michigan fans, Michigan coaches would have wanted. He's good at making reads for the most part. He's good pre-snap. He's a baller. Like, he can, if something goes wrong on a play, he can turn, water into wine or make wine out of water, as Jim Harbaugh says. But it's the more routine stuff. It's the, when you're rolling out and you've got a flood concept and you've got, Isaiah Gash short, but you've got Poston Loveland wide open in the end zone. Do you make that read? Do you see him? And then also, when you have a guy wide open, if it's a deep shot or even intermediate throws, he just hasn't been that accurate on them these last couple of weeks.
Right.
I don't know if it's, weather was certainly a factor last week. Like I mentioned, like Luke Schoonmaker, the tight end, who was really his number one target or one of his top targets, has been out these last couple of weeks. So I think that's something. It's less about cracking under pressure. It's more about, can he make the throws that at the beginning of the season were so routine for him? So that's how I think that.
Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Michigan's been very good this year defensively. They were good last year defensively, but new defensive coordinator this year, or first-year defensive coordinator. I guess new is not probably the right term anymore as we're into week 13. But Jesse Minter, how is he kind of changed this defense from what Ohio State fans saw last year, and what do you expect for him to maybe cook up against this Buckeye offense?
Sure. So I wish we talked to Jesse Minter this week or had a chance to talk to him, because one thing that was notable about him taking this job is that when he interviewed for the job, Jim Harbaugh asked candidates to show up for the interview with game plans for how they defend Ohio State.
Interesting.
So that's interesting. And obviously, what you cook up based on last year's Ohio State team, when you're interviewing for the job in, December or January, is different than what you're gonna roll out there in a couple of days. But obviously, this is a game that Michigan and Jesse Minter specifically has been thinking about for quite some time. Jesse Minter, I don't think you'd expect to see too much different from like a defensive, like schematic standpoint. The fact is, Jesse Minter comes from the same coaching tree as Mike McDonald. They both were with the Ravens. And that was one of the reasons he was hired, is like, this is year 2 of a scheme rather than starting over with year 1 again, like Michigan did last year. I think where the differences are is that the places Michigan is better at defensively this year is different than what they were last year. Last year it was the edge play that was, it let Michigan do a lot with its back seven because Mike McDonald knew he could get pressure with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, and you could rush 4 and you were still getting to the quarterback. It hasn't really been the case this year quite as much. So it means that, you've got to dial up some more exotic blitzes. If you want to get to the quarterback, you really have to be bringing more than 4. I think Michigan has not been able to get pressure very well with 4 people this year. And I certainly don't expect them to suddenly flip that switch against a talented offensive line like Ohio State that's built around protecting CJ Stroud and has done that very well all season.
One of the things that I know was talked about quite a bit on both sides was the fact that the game in 2020 wasn't played. So it's been 4 years since Michigan's been to Ohio Stadium. That means a lot of guys on both sides of the ball haven't played in this game at Ohio Stadium at the Shoe. Obviously, the crowd became quite a factor last year in that game. How do you think Michigan players will handle? Obviously, they've been on the road in the Big Ten. They've played in other venues, but how do you think they'll handle, the emotions of everything? Plus, you're the team on the road this game.
Yeah, I mean, that remains to be seen, right? I'm not very high on the Michigan football team's schedule this year, and I like a lot of it. It's not part of it is the scheduling. Michigan could have played UCLA and got out of that series, and but even like the teams that they've played have been, the whole non-conference was playing against teams that were installing either new systems or had freshman quarterbacks. And even when Michigan went on the road, Michigan's big test of the Big Ten road schedule is playing at Iowa, and that ended up being an 11 a.m. kickoff as opposed to a night game where we know how Kinnick can get at night. Ohio State, as well as Michigan does, both have had seasons, pretty heavily derailed by Kinnick at night. So there's that. Michigan hasn't really played a very imposing road atmosphere this season. They played at Rutgers at night, but that was a Rutgers, that was a stadium that was maybe 30% Michigan fans and was maybe 70% full at kickoff. So I think it really does remain to be seen. Michigan played, at Michigan State last year. They played at Nebraska last year. So they have played in big atmospheres. But this is bigger than all those, in terms of both, the size of the stadium itself. I know that, having been, I was last at the Shoe in 2014, and, the students are right there on top of you. There's very little preventing them from the field. And there's the pressure of this being the biggest game. It's what's been circled, so I think that's a very fair question. There's pressure on Michigan that's different in this game than there has been in previous years, right? In previous years, the pressure was, will we ever beat Ohio State? Now all of a sudden it's, hey, we're the reigning Big Ten champions. There's been a target on our backs all season, but all of a sudden, this is, the stakes are huge for this. And I do think that, playing at home last year was a huge factor, and I know for a fact that, Ohio State fans are chomping at the bit for a game that hasn't happened at their place in many, many years.
Yeah. You talked about fans there. I'm curious your vibe on how the fans from Ann Arbor, the Michigan fans, are feeling heading into this one. As you mentioned there, reigning Big Ten champions, finally got the monkey off the back last year.
Yeah.
So, but it is going into Columbus. It is, a highly ranked match that will decide everything. What is the feeling around the Michigan fan base about this game right now?
I think so. I think most fans are probably rightfully thinking that Ohio State is probably going to win this game. Ohio State's favored for a reason. Michigan's banged up, all those things. I think the big thing that has changed from these last couple of years is, there's finally hope, and there's finally the belief that it can happen. It had been so long, whatever the Twitter account said that kept counting up the days, those days kept getting bigger. And Michigan went into the game last year, and maybe the program knew that they could do it. Maybe there was belief in the coaching staff and the players, and but if you polled you had polled like the Michigan fan base after Michigan, not narrowly, Michigan blew out Maryland, but then you saw Ohio State just, decapitate Michigan State the week before the game last year. And, had you polled the fan base at that point, it's like, oh, like, here we go again. Like, this was a nice season. It was a nice bounce back season, but it's going to be another year where we lost to Michigan State and now we're going to lose to Ohio State again and make it to a Florida bowl game, but not really take that next step. I think last year's game and this year's performance has done a good job of rebuilding the fan base back to that confidence that, even if it's not likely or expected that Michigan's going to win, like all of a sudden it is within the realm of possibility in a sense where, in a way that it really wasn't last year.
Yeah.
Last year it was, I before this season, I was trying to like kind of piece together my feelings about Michigan football.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of, I posted this on our board, but I was kind of like, it's kind of a little bit of melancholy, a little bit bittersweet. And I think the reason for that is because last year was so unexpected. The 2021 season came out of Michigan being 2-4. It came out of, calls to fire Jim Harbaugh. It came out of like the expectation that you look at that schedule and you're like, oh, maybe Michigan goes like 7-5, 8-4 if they're really lucky. But last year they were on the road at Nebraska, on the road at Wisconsin, on the road at Michigan State, facing Ohio State. Like, you're just easily counting up those losses.
Yeah.
And then it was such a magical run when they won the Big Ten. It came out of nowhere. So there was a little bit of a, Michigan is going to be very good this year again, and they have been very good. But all of a sudden, it's less of a magical feeling and more of like this is what everyone did, and now we're going into the game again, and now this is the deciding game. Like it's
right,
taking care of business as opposed to really being joyous throughout the year.
So let's just say, and sorry, Ohio State fans listening, but let's say Michigan wins this game, goes on. We'll just assume they win the Big Ten because I think the Big Ten East winner will be the heavy favorite, whoever they end up playing there.
Yeah.
How much, obviously last year changed things for the program because they finally got over the hump, finally did all that. But doing it 2 years in a row, getting back to the college football playoff, how huge would that be for Jim Harbaugh, recruiting, the program, just kind of all encompassing there to beat Ohio State on the road, to go back, win the Big Ten for a second straight year, really establish yourself as the top team if you're Michigan?
I mean, it's hard to even put that into words because I don't even know when the last time is that Michigan beat Ohio State 2 years in a row.
Been a while.
It's been a long time. I mean, perception-wise, that would be huge, right? And that would really, I think, more for Ohio State, like show like, hey, like there's some cracks in the foundation. For Michigan, I think there was a belief that having done it last year, especially from like a recruiting standpoint, I think the belief was like if you beat Ohio State last year and you finally won the Big Ten, like there's going to be an immediate, recruiting result from that. Like Michigan will take that next step up, and that hasn't happened yet. So it's hard to say, like it's hard to answer that question because I think perception-wise, it's huge, right? Like perception-wise, you can all of a sudden point to 2021 and 2022 and tell recruits and tell the world, if you want to play in the biggest stadium in college football, if you want to play in front of the most eyeballs in college football, because this is going to be the most watched game of the weekend, certainly probably of the year. If you want to win championships, you can come to Ann Arbor, you can come to Michigan. That's a pitch that Michigan hasn't been able to give for a while. And yeah, like getting the monkey off the back of winning in Columbus, that hasn't happened, since I was in high school. Yeah, it's been a while for that too. I think it remains to be seen though, just because the recruiting aspect hasn't taken that far. I don't think anyone it's faltered in ways that people didn't really expect after this 2021 season. So I don't want to say that would be a seismic victory that would change everything forever. Because last year's win could have done that, and it hasn't. But it would be, it'd be another step in the right direction of getting Michigan back toward, national championship contention. As good as they are this year, I don't think Michigan fans are sitting here thinking Michigan's the best team in the country.
Flipping it a little bit, if Michigan loses to Ohio State, if they go to a Rose Bowl or whatever the situation, however it ends up being, would that be still viewed, a one-loss season be a success still, or is it, because in Columbus, if Ohio State loses this game on Saturday, no one's going to care about the bowl game, or, this was all, the team has been building to this. They've got the talent, they think, to win the national championship. I picked them to win the national championship before the season. I still think it's a possibility. Mm-hmm. But from the Michigan perspective, you kind of framed it this way earlier, but maybe it's not national championship or bust. Maybe this would still be a good season even if you lose to Ohio State, or is that completely off base?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think as long as Michigan doesn't get embarrassed by Ohio State, as long as Michigan keeps it close, as long as it's competitive in all these ways, I think it's a successful season based on what Michigan has, based on what Michigan's been able to build these past 24 months, I'd say. I mean, you've got to remember for Michigan, 2020 was a 2-4 season. The Harbaugh,
crazy to think about.
It's and it was 2-4. You can throw out the COVID year in a lot of ways, sure. Right? It's, who knows how much they were able to practice. Who knows? They had lots of players sitting out. But it was this Harbaugh thing is getting stale. We're not getting over the hump. And then all of a sudden, if we can't get over the hump with Jim Harbaugh, are we ever going to get over the hump? You're looking at what's going on at Nebraska and programs that have been great before, but maybe they fade a little bit. And that's what Michigan, it seemed like they were doing. At the same time, Michigan is a program that, like Ohio State, but maybe more than most other programs, including Ohio State, values history, right? And values its own tradition. And what is the goal of a Michigan football program? It's not winning the national championship. It's never been that. For Michigan, it's always been the Rose Bowl. So if Michigan makes the Rose Bowl and all of a sudden it's 2 years of 11 wins, this year is 11-0. Getting to the game undefeated for the first time since 2006, this is successful. All of a sudden, Michigan has gone from that disaster of 2020, from the not even looking competitive against Ohio State for a few years, and all of a sudden it's okay. We've beaten Ohio State, we've beaten Michigan State. At this point, Michigan has won the last game against every team in the Big Ten, plus Notre Dame. Things are great for Michigan right now. So as long as the game is close, I think a Rose Bowl is very successful. Of course, the goal is to beat Ohio State, and the goal is to have that be competitive every year and have it be a big year. But this year just encapsulated 11-1, maybe 12-1 if you can beat Utah or whoever it's going to be in that Rose Bowl. Thumbs up, basically all around.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, Alejandro, I really appreciate it. I know it's a busy week for all of us, but thank you. Alejandro and I also he answered some of my questions. It'll be in a written piece coming out later this week. If you want to go check out more Michigan content, they do a great job over at the Michigan Insider. So check them out over there. Thanks again, man. And it sounds like I'll see you at the shoe on Saturday.
I will be there. I just got an email that said that this is the hottest ticket in college football this week, which makes obviously sense. Is no surprise. But these are the things that I feel make this job very special, right? I feel very lucky that I'll be able to go down to Columbus and watch what should be a fantastic football game, one that makes legends, whether it's CJ Stroud, whether it's JJ or Blake Corum, whoever comes out on top. There's going to be a moment. You kind of feel it. There's going to be a moment that's going to be remembered for a long time. And I feel very lucky to get to go down there and watch it in person.
Absolutely. I agree. Every time I get to cover this game, it's a special one. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate your time again. Like I said, I know it's busy, so this has been great. And you gave some great insight to Ohio State fans out there.
All right.
All right, talk to you later. See you, man. Again, that was Alejandro Zuniga, who covers, excuse me, the Michigan Wolverines football, basketball for our 247 sports site, Michigan Insider. This is the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy. We've talked a lot. I think we've covered a lot of bases with this. We covered a lot of the Michigan angle with Alejandro. I think Tim and I did a decent job of hitting on it. I just want to kind of give my final thoughts on the game before we wrap up here. Let everyone cruise off into their Thanksgiving weekends, Michigan game weekends, with some parting thoughts. Look, my biggest thing for this game, if I'm Ohio State, I'm Ryan Day. I'm the captains that go out there on Saturday just before noon. If they win the coin toss, I'm taking the ball. And I know that that's usually not the way that Ohio State does things. It's usually not the way most teams do things. I want the ball. I want to march right down the field. I want to make it 7-0 out of the gates. Then I want my defense to get stopped. I want to make it 14-0 quickly. I want to establish a tone against Michigan early. And this is not anything revolutionary anything completely mind-blowing that I'm saying, but I think if you can get up 10-0, 14, especially 14-0 early in that game, it's going to be hard in my mind, whether Blake Corum plays or not, for Michigan to come from behind against this Ohio State defense. I think there are going to be certainly some challenges for the Buckeyes on both sides of the ball. I think J.J. McCarthy, his ability to escape the pocket, we've seen Ohio State struggle with some of that. But Jim Knowles is aware of what they're getting themselves into. I think they'll have some kind of plan and will be able to adjust, which I think is the best thing that Jim Knowles brings to this program, is the ability to adjust in games defensively. Look at the offensive side of the ball. You definitely have to establish the run, as Timmy and I were talking about at the beginning of the show. But this is the chance for C.J. Stroud to establish himself as the Heisman Trophy winner. If you look at his last few games, the numbers, aside from 5 touchdowns last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess I should say, against Indiana, his numbers have fallen off. I tweeted last week. I think that Caleb Williams, USC's quarterback, had jumped into the front runner for the Heisman with his performance against USC. But yeah, C.J. Stroud, 2 weeks ago, 60.7% completion, 297 yards. Last week against Maryland, 60% completion, 241 yards. Those, I believe, are 2 of his 4 or 5 worst completion percentages in his 2 years as a starting quarterback. You didn't beat Michigan last year, C.J. Stroud. You got to come out and you got to play. He played well in that game last year. Now he has the defense behind him. He certainly has the weapons. This has to be kind of a bounce-back performance from these last 2 weeks. Go out there. I mean, do what you need to do to win the game, obviously, if you're Ohio State. But I think this is CJ's chance to say, I'm going to take that Heisman Trophy and be that first guy since Troy Smith to bring the bronze statue back to Columbus. So we'll see how it goes, right? Saturday will be here before we know it. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. I know you guys are excited. I don't know what I'm saying. This is the game. This is what every year builds to, and this is the perfect kind of culmination to this season. 11-0 Ohio State, 11-0 Michigan, 2 versus 3. I was hoping last week, when Georgia was struggling with Kentucky, oh man, if Kentucky pulled the upset, 1 versus 2 again in the shoe, oh, what a story that would have been. But we'll take 2 versus 3, right? I certainly will. If you need any more Ohio State coverage, there's plenty more that we'll have on Bucknuts and 247 Sports. Please check it out. We're currently running a 75% off for annual subscribers. If you haven't joined, if you're into Ohio State football the way I think you guys all are, if you're a recruiting guy, jump on this opportunity right now. It's our Black Friday deal, but we started it on Wednesday. Jump on that while you still can. It's a great deal. If you know anybody who is an Ohio State fan that maybe isn't a Bucknuts or 247 Sports subscriber, what a great Christmas gift. And you want to spend a ton of money on that one, 75% off, as I said. We'll have plenty of coverage here the next few days. Come Friday, predictions, all that good stuff. I'm going to wait on my prediction. Usually I talk about it. Like as I said earlier, I'm picking Ohio State to win. I think it'll be a close one. But in terms of number and how I think it'll play out, tune in on Friday to the site. We'll have that on our round table. But again, I'm Patrick Murphy. Thank you guys all for tuning in, whether you were watching this live, whether you're listening to the podcast later. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff that helps us out. Thanks again from Timmy Hall from The Fan and Alejandro Zuniga from our Michigan site at 247 Sports, Michigan Insider. Both gave us a lot of good insight, and we went just over an hour. So Bucknuts Happy Hour plus a little. We'll see you Saturday at the Shoe